Stand right over here. You guys want to do a sound check, or are you good?
If you want to give us a quick sound check. Sure.
Yeah, sounds good. 1, 2, 1, 2. Test 1, 2. How's that?
Good.
Everybody set?
Good.
All right. All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this chilly morning, but at least, like I said earlier, it's not raining and it's not snowing, so we can't complain. Today's an exciting day in Baltimore. We're here to announce a new lawsuit that's being filed, or has been filed, against Baltimore City Public Schools. And I want to introduce Jovani and Shawnda Patterson, who are the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. And they have courageously stepped forward to do what needs to be done here to reform Baltimore City schools. For too many years, decades in fact, city schools has failed the students, the children of this city. Parents who have no other choice but to send their kids to Baltimore public schools trust them, and they rely on them to give their kids the education that they need to succeed in society. So statistics show that kids who achieve higher levels of literacy will earn far more throughout their lives than if they don't. The statistics show that they will be happier, they'll have less instances of depression, lead better lives, and be able to care for their kids if they have higher levels of education. And with this lawsuit, we hope to reform Baltimore City schools. Just this month, now we're not even a full month into the year, there have been over 30 murders in Baltimore City. 4 of them teenagers. 4 of them teenagers. These kids who are out on the streets committing crimes and dealing drugs, if they had education, if they could read and write like they should, instead of committing crimes, instead of being victims of murders or committing murders and being in the system, they would be earning they would have jobs, they would be earning an income, they would be taxpayers, they could support themselves, and they could support their children. That's what this is about. This is about making a fundamental change to education in Baltimore City. Consider these kids, if they graduated from Hopkins or Morgan or even Harvard, that's achievable, and that's what we hope to achieve. I want to give some examples of things that are alleged in the lawsuit and that we say in the lawsuit that are important. And the statistics and the detail I'm going to give you come right from Baltimore City Public School records, for the most part. Multiple schools have reported enrollment numbers that are higher than the students who are actually attending the schools, which means they're getting additional funding. They're getting dollars that shouldn't be going to them. And then what happens when they're there? They're ghost students. That's what they're called. They're ghost students. The taxpayers of the city are paying for these ghost students. Baltimore City spends approximately $18,000 a year per student to educate them, and yet performs at the lowest levels in the country. You'll see in the lawsuit some of the numbers. It's shocking how few students graduate with the ability to read and write at grade level in Baltimore City Public Schools. Augusta Fells reported approximately 100 students who were not actually enrolled in there, but yet were promoted to the next grade level, even though they never earned the required credits. I'm going to turn to the lawsuit, actually, because I want to give you some of these shocking numbers. You'll see in the lawsuit, we note studies which show reading is a gateway skill, and a student's ability to read in the 3rd grade is the single most important predictor of the student's future academic performance. And yet, Baltimore City Public School students are among the lowest performing in the nation in the NAEP exam. The school system's 4th and 8th grade students' achievement levels are far below those in 19 other large school districts around the country. That is absolutely unacceptable. 70% of Baltimore City students who manage to graduate high school and attend a Maryland public university have to take remedial courses in reading and writing. That is outrageous. In 2014, the school system over-reported its enrollment by 978 students and had to return $2.9 million to the city. 2 years later, they did it again and inflated their enrollment by 1,900 students. The school system did an investigation of the Augusta Fells School, and at the conclusion of their own investigation, identified at least 69 potential current instances of fraudulent enrollment record keeping relating to 52 students. The practice of social promotion, of promoting students who haven't achieved what they're supposed to achieve, has got to stop. And with this lawsuit, that's exactly what we hope to achieve. Now, I want to do a couple things here. First, I want to turn it over to Jovani, who's going to say a few words, and then we have a mother who is going to talk to you a little bit about her experiences with her kids at the Baltimore City Public Schools. Jovani?
I want to first thank everyone for joining me, friends, family, and especially my wife. I know this doesn't come easy. So I'm going to start off with this. My name is Jovani Patterson. I'm first a husband, I'm a father, and I'm an extremely concerned resident of Baltimore City. As a man, it is my duty to love God with everything in me, love, lead, and guide my family, and bring value to help my community and those around me. Now, on behalf of our families, generations past and present, on behalf of teachers, parents, and particularly our students, we're here for one simple reason: to take bold action against the waste, fraud, and abuse that's been happening in Baltimore City Public Schools. As it stands today, we, the taxpayer, are funding our own demise. At about $18,000 spent per pupil, what has been the outcome? This dollar amount is 25% higher than the national average. Yet, our school systems perform worse than almost any other major large school system in the nation. Year after year, Baltimore City Schools has been graduating students that aren't proficient in reading and in math. The effects of this are clear. The lack of basic skills leads to the inability to obtain decent jobs and create opportunities. As a result, too often, many of our youth turn to drugs, gangs, and violence. This has to stop. This is why we have decided to sue the Baltimore City school system and Baltimore City to put an end to these systemic failures. Our leaders have had decades to make a change and have failed. Now it is our time. It is time for the people to step up and the courts to step in. Now I want to provide a little bit of hope, because this is the goal this is the outcome that we wish to receive. And imagine a city where a majority of our students were accepted into the nation's top schools based on the merits of their own education. Imagine our primary community discussions involving which side of town produces the most doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and artists year after year. Imagine the great architectural achievements that could come from within these 92 square miles to change the face of many of our blighted neighborhoods. I want to end with a quote from Frederick Douglass. But I want you to think about this in the inverse. Education means emancipation. It means light and liberty. It means the uplifting of the soul of man into the glorious light of truth, the light by which men can only be made free.
Thank you, Jovani, and I appreciate those moving words. Next, I want to introduce Blanca Tapawasco, who is a parent here in Baltimore City and is going to tell you a little bit about her experiences with her students, her kids, in Baltimore City Public Schools. Blanca? I'm Blanca, if you could just spell your last name for everybody
Yes.
before you get started.
Sure.
Step right up to the microphone.
Sure. Blanca Tapawasco, Tapawasco, Tapawasco. These are my two sons. I am first an immigrant who did not know one word of English when I came here. I was adopted. And so I thank my parents who took the time to instill in me that there is no free lunch. I am a resident now of Baltimore City, have been since I went to Maryland Institute College of Art after graduating high school. These are now my children. And I am instilling the same values to them. My experience with Baltimore City began 10 years ago when I started as a volunteer teaching English to parents who wanted to help their kids to understand their homework. That's a virtue for me. I took pride in that. Then I began working in school, both as a contractor and then as an employee. Unfortunately, for my son who needed an IEP, I was told due to COVID, he could not get evaluated. So I went ahead and pulled my children out. They are still part of Baltimore City Public School under the homeschool, hospital, and homeschool program. So they are still part of the Baltimore City. I have found since, after 1.5 years, 18 months ago when I pulled my children out to homeschool them, that in fact my son could have been and should have been evaluated. It took me calling the Maryland State Department of Education Ombudsman Office. It took an independent medical evaluation of 6 hours to determine that he should have received, at the very least, the opportunity to be evaluated for an IEP. 18 months later cannot be recovered. 10 years cannot be recovered for any of the children who do not have a parent who is both engaged, informed, and passionate, both about having children prepared, having children have an advocate, having parents have an advocate. That's a new concept. And so I'm here to fully support the Patterson family and every family. And I want to reach out to every parent listening that taxpayers pay for school. Taxpayers pay, and we're paying in ways of low graduation. My son, who takes the state exam, the record is in the headquarters here, is 1 grade above the national standard. Not because I'm a great parent, I'm a great teacher, and I have taught in school. It's because I take the time and I find the resources and I press forward to get the work done. And I care about each child, whether they were born out of me or not. And now, since I am homeschooling, I am now also tutoring some of the children. There is a 6th grader who I am tutoring currently, a 12th grader. I will not be naming the schools for the respect of the families, who cannot read, cannot write, and I have now been assigned to be a tutor through the Baltimore City and Baltimore County Public School, Department of Health and Human Services. That is how desperate parents have gotten. They have called, they have found, they have sought, and they have a will to get their kids educated. And so I fully support anything that has to do with the children who are right here. People say our children are a future. No, they're our present right now. Because if they don't have a present, they will not have a future. And I thank you very much.
I want to thank Blanca and thank Jovani and Shawnda for the courage to come out here and say the things that need to be done and take the action that needs to be done. And I want to thank everybody here who's standing behind us to support us. And I know that people in the city who aren't standing here support this kind of reform. I started by saying this is a great day for Baltimore City, and I mean that. And I want to end by asking all of you to imagine what this city will be like a decade from now, 2 decades from now, after the school system is transformed, and we have generations of children graduating who can read and can write and can be productive members of society. That's how we reduce crime here. That's how we end poverty. That's how we improve the city and bring it back to where it once was. I want to thank everybody for coming out, and I'm happy to entertain any questions.
Maddie O'Neill with the Daily Record. Why is a lawsuit the appropriate way to get
Maddie, it's a great question. The problems that have happened here in the Baltimore City Public Schools have been going on for decades. This is not something new. There have been efforts to reform in the past, and they failed. We've had different leadership here, both at Baltimore City Public Schools and city government, and nothing has changed. At some point, there has to be some oversight and control to effectuate the changes. I mean, if we think back to Brown versus Board of Education, one of the most important cases ever, if it wasn't for the courts, we would not have had integration of the school system. Yes?
Do you have children in the school system that you're acting on behalf of, or is this on behalf of the taxpayers?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you with the traffic.
Do you have children in the school system?
Jovani and Shawnda do, absolutely.
Can you tell us about how many you have?
One.
And Shawnda is a former Baltimore City Public School teacher. I mean, she knows firsthand what is going on here in the city.
Was there a singular event that brought you to the point that you felt you needed to bring this lawsuit?
I mean, just look at our city. I don't think there needs to be any extra words.
Can you explain the possible connection between education, a poor education, and the level of violence and crime that we're seeing, and is that part of this?
Well, if you're working, like, what else do you have to do? If you have a job, if you have opportunities, if you have to get up 5 a.m. to go somewhere to make money, you don't have time for crime.
How does this impact taxpayers?
Well, it's a complete benefit. Right now, taxpayers, are paying for our own demise. When we're seeing a failing school system that's essentially systematically pumping out, unprepared citizens. So the benefit is that it will create more taxpayers. So we'd see better roads. We'd see better bridges within our city. We'd probably see a new transportation system. We'd see our communities have some of the greatest architectural minds within them. So it benefits the city because more tax dollars will be able to be created. It benefits the taxpayers now because less tax dollars will be wasted.
Kenzie, you'll also see in the lawsuit some data linking education to crime and how kids are more likely to become involved in crime later in their lives. And then when we think about the burden on taxpayers for a second, right now, city schools receives a huge amount of money, almost the most in the nation. And yet the product that they're getting is just woefully inadequate. If we can improve the product, number one, those tax dollars, we're getting more for our money as taxpayers. The other thing is when these kids graduate and they're able to get good jobs, they're able to earn a living and support themselves and their families. They require less government assistance. They're less likely to be involved in the criminal justice system. Their children are more likely to be successful, and they're contributing more tax dollars into the system, not to mention more money into the economy. So it's a huge improvement for the city as a whole.
Could you explain why you filed this in state court rather than federal? It seems like you're not taking this from a civil rights approach. Am I right on that?
You are correct. We're not taking this from a civil rights approach, and it's a really interesting question. Historically, lawsuits brought around the country to reform the education system have often tried to enforce constitutional rights, saying there's a constitutional right to a good education. But they failed almost every time because the courts have held at the federal level and here in Maryland that there isn't a constitutional right to a good education, as shocking as that is. So what we've done is we've taken an approach from the perspective of the taxpayer. So this is a taxpayer standing lawsuit that seeks to assert the rights of the taxpayers whose dollars are being wasted, whose tax dollars are being wasted because of the poor education system. I've never seen a lawsuit approach it quite like this.
Do you think that'll help the argument, given the fact, like you said, we've seen similar situations fail in the past based on the constitutionality argument?
I do. We think this is the right approach because the courts in the past have rejected the constitutional challenges. So we're approaching it from the perspective of the rights of the taxpayers. And the Maryland Court of Appeals has been very clear that taxpayers have a right to protect their tax dollars when government is wasting them through illegal and what's called ultra-virus actions.
Why not? Is there a role for the federal government here? Do you think the federal government does play a part in this?
I mean, that's a huge question. It depends on one's perspective. I mean, how much control do you want the federal government to have over education versus the local governments? The school system here in Baltimore is different from the school system in Philadelphia and New York and Miami. So I don't know that we have to resolve that question in this lawsuit so much as we have the ability here locally to exert more control and to reform our own school system. I don't think we have to wait for the federal government. Any other questions?
Yeah, the state is working on blueprint right now.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, it's so loud.
Not your fault.
The state is working on blueprint right now to overhaul the school system, not just in the city but elsewhere. Where do you guys stand on that? Do you think that it goes far enough, or it's not being able to produce the change that you're looking for?
As you said, the state is working on it, so I think it's too early to comment on what the ultimate product is going to be, what they're going to come up with. I will say this, though. I don't think the city should wait any longer for those outside of the city to reform the city school system. It's time that we help ourselves here in the city, and we have the tools to do it, and this lawsuit is one of those tools. And beyond that, I think one of the things we have seen in other instances is sometimes you need the oversight of a judge to reform government organizations and make them do what they need to do. I think history has shown that time and time again. Any other questions? All right, folks, thanks for coming out again. We have copies of the lawsuit for those who don't have them. We can also email you copies that have active hyperlinks if you want those for the studies and some of the exhibits. There are about 600 pages of exhibits that are in color, so some of the graphics are nice, but I didn't want to carry that many big, heavy things, so we're happy to send you a link to them. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Hang out there, thanks. Bing. Take that too.